Good evening, everyone. Thank you very much for bracing the storm, bracing the not having power, and truly embracing the environment tonight. And so my name is Andrew Henley. I'm the library director at the Newcastle Public Library, as well as a 2017 graduate here of Westminster College. And so I want to thank you for coming to our last part of our cultural series titled Our Interconnected World. Our cultural series started last fall, where we focused on death and dying, topics that you typically don't have at a dining room table. And so we wanted to engage individuals in having conversation about topics that you might avoid or might not have that conversation at your dining room table. And so that fall program, we focused on death and dying. Our coroner's office came into the library where we had over 80 people learn about what the coroner's office does as an elected office. We also embraced various cultures on how they approach death, and so that was one of the big things that we focused on. In the spring, we focused on religious experiences of the world, and so in that topic, we highlighted various religions all over the world, but specifically those that all over the world but exist here. And so whether it was the Amish, whether it was the economists and Harmony, or whether it was the Sisters of the Humility of Mary. And so we actually had the final presentation with Tibetan monks that came from Georgia at the library and presented a sand mandala. And this year's fall presentation, Our Interconnected World, as well as the first two, could not have been made possible without Gabby Lucas here. And so Gabby's our Deputy Director of Operations, who also does all of our adult services programming. And so this evening's presentation was really a brainchild of Gabby's, really bringing together the environment as a topic that we wanted to discuss. The first event was actually at the Apple Castle, where we took a tour all throughout the Apple Castle, learned about what the orchard does, and the way that they support our communities. The second one that we did was we all live downstream, and it was a topic regarding the Lawrence County Conservation District and what they do as a conservation district and the water systems that are in place. Then we came here to Westminster, where we met with Dr. Clarence, and we were able to experience the bees here on campus at the apiary. And so the Buzz on Bees was a hands-on program that people were able to put on their bee outfits, really experience what it's like to have an apiary, and then also taste the honey. Then the second to last presentation was really a Halloween favor. So we brought a George Mason University professor in, who was a former dentist and a former FBI agent, to talk about body farms and human decomposition. And so using human bodies as studies to understand how the human body decomposes for forensic science. And so there are these body farms all across the United States. And so Dr. DeZinio from George Mason University spoke about his work on the body farms and training FBI agents in the study of human decomposition. And so tonight, as you're aware, or if you aren't aware, you are here to learn more about Aldo Leopold. And so I have the pleasure of introducing a friend of mine, as well as the college's staff here at the Clarence and Marianne Harms Center for the Environment, where we are able to discuss the legend who was Aldo Leopold and introduce Newcastle native, I'll say, Curt Meine. Dr. Meine is a professor at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, as well as a fellow at the Aldo Leopold Foundation. He also is a renowned conservation biologist, environmental historian, and a writer. Dr. Meine is the biographer, and actually Dr. Orr, if you know Dr. David Orr from Oberlin College, I wrote to him and I invited him to come this evening, and he said, Curt is the biographer of Aldo Leopold. And so he spoke highly of yourself. Aldo Leopold was one of the most influential figures in American conservation and an author of the Sand County Almanac. Curt's acclaimed book, Aldo Leopold, His Life and Work, is the definitive biography of Leopold, exploring not only the man and his ideas, but also the enduring impact of land ethic on the modern environmental thought. And so, on a more personal note, I met Curt probably about 10 years ago or more. His aunt was a mentor of mine, Anita DeVivo. Anita was our friend of the year this year, where we honored her and brought her sister in from Brooklyn, Curt's aunt, and spoke about the works of Anita. And Anita's legacy is living on today through the connection with Curt. Curt had said, well, I'll see you at the family reunion. And so really I'm grateful to welcome you to Westminster's campus, back to Lawrence County, to present for the Newcastle Public Library and the college. But before I have you come up, I want to really introduce Dr. Dewar to talk about the Center for the Environment and what's happening here on campus.
Thanks. I feel like you should have gone first. I'm Carrie Dewar. I'm director of the Harm Center for the Environment, and welcome to campus. We are very excited to partner again with the library to offer an event for the community. For those of you who were here for the BEAT event, that was also great, and we want to welcome you back. The mission of the Harm Center for the Environment is to connect people with each other and with nature. And these sorts of events are outreach events that we love to do, that allows our students to be involved with other events that are happening in the community, and to share stories about each other and about science and about stewardship. And so this event tonight is a perfect example of how we achieve that. I think that I'm a huge fan of Leopold. Leopold made a huge impact on my career. This is his Sand County Almanac. I've read it multiple times. I had an opportunity as a graduate student to go to Wisconsin and visit his property there, and it had a big impact on how I defined my role in the environment and how I made connections with the natural world and what that meant. And so I think that Leopold's land ethic, for which he is known, is this idea that humans have a place in the environment, that it's a shared place, that we are equal members of an ecosystem, and that we find that place through observation of our natural world, and to think about how we use the land and how we can do that in a sustainable way. And so that is a philosophy that I bring to my teaching and to all of the events that we do with the center. And so as an example for that, last spring, Dr. Clarence and I, we taught a course on public land management. And we used Leopold's writings to direct that course, and students read his book, and then we traveled to the national parks of the Desert Southwest. And they were able to make connections between Leopold's writing and their place in the environment, sort of following the idea of the national parks, right? Find your park. This was find your Leopold moment. And so I think our students had a really good experience making those connections. And so again, I welcome you all here. We're excited to hear what Dr. Meine has to say, and welcome.
Well, I'm excited to hear what I'm going to say, because I ain't going to say what I plan to say, because there are no slides. I'll talk about my family a little bit today. My family from the Newcastle, Youngstown area. Almost every single member of the family to this day, 3-4 generations later, are musicians. So I grew up with music, learning to improvise, making stuff up when you need to make stuff up. So we're going to make up some stuff. And I know I'm supposed to stand here. Sorry, I'll try to be good. But I'm improvising now. And you're going to help me, because I need your help. All those amazing photos that I'll tell you a little bit about. You're going to have to use your imaginations. Actually, it was kind of funny. In planning this to come here, I played with the idea of not using slides. I literally a week ago, I was out in Iowa doing some talks. I'm like, I'm not going to have time to get ready for that one. Maybe I'll just go, no slides. Because we all spend too much time in front of screens anyway, right? You don't need, especially students, they don't need more screens to stare at. Not that I'm a good alternative of something to stare at, but. So no slides, no screens. It's a library. What do librarians do? They tell stories. And that's what we all do anyway, all of us, every single one of us. We're storytellers, even if you don't think of yourself as a storyteller. You are, because you're a human. Well, most of you. I haven't checked out every single one of you, but you all look like humans to me. So I'm going to tell some stories. I'll tell you about Leopold a little bit, but before I launch into this, I want to get a little oriented here. How many of you are students, first of all? Okay. The rest of you are not, except as lifelong students. How many of you are from within a 100-mile radius where you grew up? Oh, most of you are from the area. Okay, cool. How many of you have ever heard of Aldo Leopold? How many of you have never heard of Aldo Leopold? Ah, okay. That was an important one. Okay. Okay, then. So I'll tell you what I was going to tell you. That I'm not going to tell you. Does that make sense? Here's what I was going to tell you. First of all, I was going to start on the word connections because that's in the title of the presentation. And already it was used a couple times in introductions. So that word will still be there. I'm going to talk about connections from Wisconsin, where I live, to Pennsylvania here, where I was born, 15 miles down the road, Jameson Hospital. Jameson or Jameson? Yeah. I was going to start out with a couple Leopold lines for those who don't know Leopold. They kind of capture some of his essence. And for those who do know Leopold, you've never read these because they're not in his famous book. I dug them out of the archives. One of his lines was this: there are two things that interest me: the relation of people to land and the relation of people to each other. So connections. The relation of people to each other and the relation of people to land, which encompasses pretty much everything in our experience if we think about it. Land, not just the dirt outside the door, but land that gives us life. Every time we eat, drink, breathe, we are connecting to the land. But we can't understand our connections to land unless we understand our connections to one another. Because all of us are in our human communities, and all our human communities are embedded in that larger community that Leopold described. We'll throw out another line. I told you, we're going to be riffing all night tonight. In the introduction to the book that was mentioned, Leopold said, "We abuse land because we regard it as a commodity belonging to us. When we see land as a community to which we belong, we may begin to use it with love and respect." Those are words from 1948. Keep that date in mind. That'll come up. So land is a community to which we belong. And even if we don't think about it much, again, it's who we are. We are the land. Because in other places he defined land. It's not just, again, soil. Soils, waters, plants, animals, and people. That was his definition of land as a community. And we are all in that community. There is no other community. So, the other quote was from a little earlier, 1939, also an important date to keep in mind, right before World War II. And I don't have this one completely memorized, but I'll try. Our tools are better than we are, and they grow better faster than we do. They suffice to command the tides, to split the atom, but they don't suffice for the oldest task in human history, to live on a piece of land without spoiling it. So you're in the 1930s, a time of great degradation of the environment, Dust Bowl years, if you're in the history arena, soil erosion across the continent. And Leopold was very cognizant, very involved in efforts to try to address those issues. Our tools are better than we are and grow better faster than we do. Yeah, drama. So Leopold never thought about artificial intelligence or data centers or any of the other latest things that we are having to grapple with as humans, trying to keep our humanity in the face of rapid technological change, which occasionally fails us. None of the technologies suffice for the oldest task in human history, to live on a piece of land without spoiling it. So this is where the part of the slideshow is going to segue into this cool little series of photos from Newcastle, Pennsylvania, and my family. I was going to talk about Newcastle and its history, this area more generally, the geology, the glaciers, the plants and animals, the economies, the Native American presence here. I was going to talk about my people and how they ended up here. And I'm going to start in a different way than I was going to plan to. I'm going to start with my dad, actually. My father was born just north of Youngstown in 1922. He died 2 months ago. He was 3 days shy of his 103rd birthday. He was born and raised there in Liberty Township. Is anyone familiar? Just north of Youngstown. And grew up there. He was, as I mentioned, a very talented musician. His instrument was a French horn. He got hooked on French horn. He became a prodigy. He ended up playing in the Youngstown Orchestra when he was a teenager. Somehow he got into the Pittsburgh Symphony Orchestra when he was a young kid. Which, man, yeah. So my dad, he then was drafted into World War II when he was 19 years old. And he was in training. This is going to get hard, so bear with me if I lose myself here. He was sent over to Europe in fall of 1944 to march across Europe with Patton's army, across France and into southern Germany. And in March of 1945, as the war was reaching its climax, he was shot twice. He was very lucky to survive. He ended up being sent back to the hospital, field hospital in France. They patched him up, sent him right back to the front lines in 3 weeks after getting shot in the arm and in the back. Sent him back to the front lines to march into Germany further, where he would be among the liberating troops going into Dachau in April of 1945. He experienced the worst that you could possibly experience in the human experience of war. And he survived. He made it to Munich, where he spent the remainder of the war as a musician. If we have any musicians in the room, you'll appreciate that not far away from Munich was the home of the composer Richard Strauss, arguably the most famous composer in the world at the time, particularly known for composing for French horn. So my dad went to visit the maestro, left him with lifelong memories. He talked about this when he was 102 years old. That's how powerful this was. So I could give a whole lecture just on this experience, but we got to keep moving on. He comes back from the war. He ends up in this area again. He joins several of the musical outfits in this area and became conductor. He was interested in conducting. He was in the Newcastle Symphony Orchestra with two of my aunts and an uncle. My mother, an aunt, and an uncle. My mother played timpani. And Anita, she was clarinet. I have a picture of this. Newcastle Symphony circa 1950. Well, long story short, they got married. I came along. I was the fourth of four boys. My dad and my mom, God bless her, she somehow enjoyed camping. She was Italian by background. This is not something they would normally do, but she loved it. My dad, it was his comfort. He would be wrestling with his war experience for the rest of his life, literally until the last days of his life. It shaped him profoundly. It shaped all of us profoundly. And it was a demon for him in many ways, but in the end, he came to peace with it. Again, topic for another story, another time. My parents married, had their kids. That family, the Meine side of the family, ran a greenhouse out south of Newcastle on Savannah Road. Okay, and heads nodding, thank you. I haven't been there since I was very little. We moved away. My dad's career took him in the musical world to Detroit, Baltimore, Chicago. He became manager of the Chicago Symphony Orchestra, which is about as high as you can rise in the classical music world. But always, 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 he was passionate about being outside. Fishing. We were a fishing and camping family. And that's partly where my early experience comes from. From my Italian side, it was also there from an early age. I'll talk about that a little later. So I was very close with my grandparents and came back to Newcastle regularly after leaving. And I mention this because I watched what happened, not only with Newcastle, but with all the Rust Belt cities, from Chicago to New York, from Reading, Pennsylvania to every old industrial city. Newcastle was a life, observing it through my lifetime and watching the deindustrialization of the small cities of the Rust Belt, but also always appreciating the beauty of this landscape here, knowing that I was somehow imprinted on it. So I want to get you in a little bit of a mindset there to think about those years after World War II, when all of this began to change. A lot of students in the room, and there are some history professors in the room, to get a feel for the shifts and the changes in the American landscape, the cultural landscape as well as the ecological landscape. This is what Leopold was all about, trying to understand how our places change. Our places meaning both the human community and the natural community. So I'm going to take you back now to March of 1948. This fellow, Aldo Leopold, turns out he's in the last 6 months of his life. I had a long sequence of slides to give you a bio of Leopold, but I'll not do that. I'll just tell you this. Leopold was born in the Midwest. He came east because he was interested as a teenager in the early 1900s, first decade of the 1900s, in forestry. If you were a young person interested in environmental stuff back then, you didn't have many choices. Forestry was it. And forestry as a profession was born in Pennsylvania, among other important places. But the name most commonly associated with this is Gifford Pinchot, one-time governor of Pennsylvania. Before that, the first head of the Forest Service, and often called the first American trained forester, from on the eastern side of the state in the Delaware River Valley in Milford, PA. If you're ever out that way, go visit. The crisis of the day, 1905, deforestation. Deforestation was the climate change crisis of its time. Because there was no professional forestry, there was no Forest Service, there was no practice on the ground. So deforestation worked its way from New England across Pennsylvania and New York, all the way through Michigan, Minnesota, and Wisconsin. In 1905, barren, especially because of white pine. The white pine that you can see probably by walking out this door on any day was the tree that the loggers of the time were after. And there was no thought of sustainable forestry. That comes with forestry, and it comes through the Pinchot family of Pennsylvania, especially by endowing the brand new forestry school at Yale University. So Leopold uproots himself as a teenager, goes east to prep school outside of Princeton, New Jersey, then goes to Yale, becomes one of the first trained foresters. He goes off to the Southwest, as we heard about. He distinguishes himself very early by being that next generation of leaders in conservation. He's particularly interested in some key things. He's interested in wildlife. There's no field of wildlife conservation either at this point. He's interested in the problem of soil erosion. Again, this is another climate change crisis growing of its time. The loss of soil through unwise land use and agriculture especially. And he's observing this in the Southwest. He begins to become interested in the phenomenon of erosion and the necessary attention to watersheds. It's a rainy night now, so it's a good day to talk about watersheds. This is where I would have plugged in that photograph of Newcastle, Pennsylvania in 1913, when the Shenango River flooded all of downtown Newcastle. And my granddad was 10 years old and remembered it very well and told me those stories. The Johnstown flood of Pennsylvania. Pymatuning Reservoir. How many have been there? Yes. My earliest outdoor memories are of that state park. Camping there. I, to this day, have the most vivid memories of bullfrogs at Pymatuning. And my mom and I playing Scrabble by Coleman Lantern at our camp spot. Imprinted totally deep in my brain. So watersheds was another interest of Leopold's, and wilderness, protecting wilderness in the 1920s. What's happening in the 1920s? Automobiles are happening. For the first time, automobiles are happening. Roads are being built. Vast areas that had no roads in them were suddenly getting paved roads. And Leopold saw that as a threat, that we would lose something if we put roads everywhere on the land. And so he worked to create the very first wilderness area in the world, called the Gila Wilderness Area in New Mexico. Well worth a trip out there. Put it on your bucket list. At that point, he decides to move back to the Midwest. I won't go into details. Eventually joins the University of Wisconsin as the first professor of wildlife ecology. Brand new field. He pretty much invents it. Nobody invents a field, but he almost was the only guy. Trying to understand not just this and that organism, but the relationship of wildlife in communities as ecologists understand it. He writes the first textbook in the field. He trains the first grad students in the field. He teaches the first classes in Madison, Wisconsin. He helps create the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service eventually. But he's an unusual character in that he's always interested in the historical and cultural dimensions of all this. Always connecting the science and the stories. The science with literature, history, poetry even. he teaches through the 1930s, a time of economic depression and the looming threat of World War and the Dust Bowl. It's a time of deep cultural change as well, as the vast accumulation of wealth imploded in on itself in the Depression years. And you couldn't think about conservation without thinking about the social, cultural, economic dimensions. So Leopold is beginning to think much more deeply about not just the science, but he's starting to think about the ethical content of all this. What does it mean? What do we value in these very, very dark years? So, several of his children serve in World War II. And in 1948, he's been working on this little book, this little collection of essays, to try to communicate to the general public why it was important to understand this new field, this new science of ecology. That is not a word that was known back then. And he doesn't even use it all that much in the book. He shows it. He tells stories. He doesn't give you the definitions or certainly not the formulas. There's no formula. Not a single. He's a scientist. There's not a formula in this book that would make him a global figure. And remember from what I read before, we may begin to use it with love and respect. If you're a scientist, those are not words you're supposed to be using in your professional publications, love and respect. That's not what scientists do. But here's what Leopold wrote. Okay, 1948, March. Imagining my granddad going off to work in the morning. On that same day, he would have gone to the work at the B&O Railroad. My granddad's worked 50 years on the B&O Railroad out Newcastle. He knew every small town in Pennsylvania that was on a rail track. In the latter part of his career, his job was to go clean up train wrecks. Imagine cleaning up train wrecks in the narrow valleys of Pennsylvania. I've often used that as a metaphor in my life. If my dad could clean up those train wrecks, maybe I can do it a little bit. This is Leopold in 1948. There are some who can live without wild things, and some who cannot. These essays are the delights and dilemmas of one who cannot. Like winds and sunsets, wild things were taken for granted until progress began to do away with them. Now we face the question whether a still higher standard of living is worth its cost in things natural, wild, and free. For us in the minority, the opportunity to see geese is more important than television. And the chance to find a pasque flower is a right as inalienable as free speech. These wild things, I admit, had little human value until mechanization assured us of a good breakfast. And until science disclosed the drama of where they come from and how they live. The whole conflict thus boils down to a question of degree. We of the minority see a law of diminishing returns in progress. Our opponents do not. There's a couple things when you read that, or when I do anyway, that come out. You use the word television. 1948 is when the first probably commercial televisions were being sold. That would be like him saying, if he were writing it today, would be, the opportunity to see geese is more important than ChatGPT. That would be the equivalent. After World War II, the economy was being unleashed. All the wartime technologies were being converted and applied to economic growth and progress. And that begins the three-generation economic juggernaut, another word Leopold liked to use, that continues to this day and that we are still trying to figure out. At least that's how I think of it. and how that economy that every single day we hear news headlines about, and we shake our heads and we go, oh, okay, and now we got tariffs, now we got China not buying soybeans, and now we got... And there's never an economist that ever uses the word soil or water or plants and animals. Those words are not in the vocabulary of modern professional economics. And if they are, they're used as, quote, natural resources, i.e. serving us. That land as a community is a basic concept of ecology, but the land is to be loved and respected, is an extension of ethics. That land yields a cultural harvest is a fact long known, but often forgotten. These essays try to explain all this. Such a view of land and people is, of course, subject to the blurs and distortions of personal experience and personal bias. But wherever the truth may lie, this much is crystal clear. Our bigger and better society is now like a hypochondriac, so obsessed with its own economic health as to have lost the capacity to remain healthy. The whole world is so greedy for more bathtubs that it's lost the stability necessary even to build them. Nothing could be more salutary at this stage than a little healthy contempt for a plethora of material blessings. Now I flash on our Amish friends in the neighborhood around here, thinking how they're coping with our material blessings this evening when the lights are out. Perhaps this shift of values can be achieved by reappraising things unnatural, tame, and confined in terms of things natural, wild, and free. So that was the introduction to this book. Here's the quick history of the book. It was published in the fall of 1949, 76 years ago last week. It sold modestly. First 20 years, 20,000 copies maybe. Then comes the baby boom generation, and comes the paperback version in the mid-60s. Comes Earth Day in 1970, the first Earth Day. And within a couple of years, the book sells 2 million copies. And it becomes one of the key books for the Earth Day baby boom generation that launches the modern environmental movement. And it carries on through subsequent generations. And at the end of the book, he summarizes his philosophy in a very well-known essay if you're a student of environmental philosophy or history. His essay was called The Land Ethic, a phrase he came up with in trying to wrap himself around. Now, remember, he's not a writer full-time. He's teaching. He's a busy professor. And he also has 5 kids and a wife, and he's a very devoted father, and he loves being outside, so the last thing he wants to do is sometimes sit down and write, but he is compelled, especially in these post-World War II years, and especially right after World War II when he's diagnosed with a very serious health condition and has to go, imagine this, in 1947, to have a brain operation at the Mayo Clinic. Imagine getting your brain operated in 1947. That summer, he sits down and writes this essay because, and this has always been my suspicion, he's going for brain surgery. He doesn't know what he's going to come out the other end, whether he's going to even be able to operate himself. So in the summer of 1947, he sits down and he writes this essay that would go on to become one of the most important foundational statements in the new field of environmental ethics. So the land ethic is kind of when I entered the story, because I did my master's degree on how, when, and why Leopold wrote this. And I won't read it. Don't worry about that. I will read just a short little bit of it. I think I'll choose this little bit because there are a lot of students in the room. And imagine the students here are studying lots of different stuff. Some of you are studying music, some of you are studying math, some of you are studying humanities. I don't know what you're studying, but it's all connected. And this is where one of Leopold, by all accounts, he was a great teacher, because he and partly because he didn't intend to be a professor, I think. So he dealt with students as peers more than as students in a way. But he was always looking to see how he could connect the students' interest with his interest in land and the enrichment. In one of his last lectures, he said, I have no fear of what you'll do. I'm teaching how to read the land, by which he meant how if you can look at a piece of land, a landscape, understand its past, its history, its plants and animals, its geology, its ecology, its human history. You could read that in the land if you knew what you're looking for. He says, I'm trying to teach you to read that soils, waters, plants, and animals spell out a story that you can read. And once you learn to read the land, I have no fear of what you will do to it or with it. And I know many pleasant things it will do to you. That was Leopold's spirit as a teacher. So here's what he writes. One of the requisites for an ecological comprehension of land is an understanding of ecology. But this is by no means coextensive with education. In fact, much higher education seems deliberately to avoid ecological concepts. An understanding of ecology does not necessarily originate in courses bearing ecological labels. It is quite as likely to be labeled geography, history, agronomy, history, economics, botany. This is as it should be. The case for a land ethic would appear hopeless, but for the minority which is in obvious revolt against these trends. The key log that must be moved, a key log, by the way, that's an old logging term. A key log was the log in a log jam on a river, that if you remove that log, the whole jam would open up. The key log. The key log that must be moved to release this evolutionary process for an ethic is simply this: quit thinking about decent land use as solely an economic problem. Examine each question in terms of what is ethically and aesthetically right, as well as what is economically expedient. A thing is right when it tends to preserve the integrity, stability, and beauty of the biotic community. It's wrong when it tends otherwise. I've literally given whole lectures on those 3 sentences. There's a lot packed in there. That was Leopold's final statement. He did have this medical condition that stressed him. He would die of a heart attack, actually, in the spring of 1948, just a few weeks after writing that introduction. He was helping fight a fire that had escaped on a neighbor's farm, where his family farm was. He went off, as a good forester would, to try to stop the fire. He had a heart attack and died. 1 week before that tragic fire, he learned that this book would be published. He got a call from New York, from Oxford University Press. So he died knowing this book would be published. He never knew its title. All over the world, for 3 generations, Leopold and San County Almanac are joined at the hip. Leopold never knew that title. It was given by his son, who took over getting the book published. It's 1948. The world is beginning to change quite rapidly. The science is beginning to reveal all kinds of things Leopold would never know about. He didn't know what DNA was. Think of that. Certainly didn't know plate tectonics or climate science or all the other things that we have at our disposal now. But the idea of an ethic begins to proliferate not only through him. He's one voice, but there are many other voices. Rachel Carson would come along in another decade. Silent Spring. This is where I had a lot of great slides with a lot of great references for students, but we'll have to pass. But just to let you know who I would have invoked: Rachel Carson, Martin Luther King, Edward Abbey, also from nearby Pennsylvania, just 100 miles to the east here in the town of Home, Pennsylvania, right? If I remember correctly. And other writers. I would have brought in Pope Francis. His encyclical statement from 2015, Laudato Si, speaking from the Catholic tradition toward an ethic of care for the earth. Or Thich Nhat Hanh, the great Buddhist monk, who never studied ecology, but in his way of formulating Buddhist thought, saw connection and responsibility and love. I would have brought in the voice of my friend Robin Kimmerer. Robin Kimmerer, anyone? Yeah. Teaches up in Syracuse, New York, not so far away. She was my friend from graduate school years in Madison. She's now very well known for her writing. If you haven't read Braiding Sweetgrass, the heads are nodding, thumbs are going up. Braiding Sweetgrass, long on the bestseller list now. But like Leopold's book, it took years for it to get there. So these are the voices, diverse, from very different religious traditions, different academic backgrounds, different scientific fields, different ways of seeing and understanding the world, who have allowed to happen what Leopold most hoped would happen. Toward the end of his essay, The Land Ethic, Leopold says, "Nothing so important as an ethic is ever written. It evolves in the minds of a thinking community." So ponder that for a moment. In his essay that he just wrote called The Land Ethic, he says nobody writes an ethic. Because nobody can write an ethic. An ethic is an expression of community values. And all the great movements for progress in culture within the U.S. and beyond are built on foundations of moral and ethical progress. Whether it's civil rights, and the women's movement, the environmental movement, on and on. So Leopold hoped that what he was trying to get a handle on there in 1948 would continue to grow. And indeed it has. And it's never unidirectional. There's always progress and then there's backsliding. There's leaps forward and then there's some really difficult times when we fall backward too. So I'm happy to answer any questions about any of this, but I thought I'd give the last word to my grandfather. You guys have a copy of this, right? So here's the story. Last story for me. Summer 1979. I'm a junior in college in Chicago, DePaul University. Somehow I convinced my professor that it would be a great idea for me to go to Newcastle, Pennsylvania, and spend the summer interviewing my granddad, and that I would get credit for this. He says, "Sure, why not?" My professor did. So I came to visit Grandma and Grandpa. They lived right near the hospital, actually, not far from Anita's house. I spent 3 to 4 weeks with my Italian grandmother and grandfather. The thing they did was clean out the garage and put in a picnic table. There was never a car parked in the garage. It was a picnic table, and that's where the family gathered, ate and drank and sang and hung out. So I got my little cassette recorder and sat down with Grandpa and interviewed him. And eventually, because my family also has a bunch of writers in it, we published this little book about his experience as a young immigrant growing up in a small town in Italy near Naples, his memories of his childhood and coming over to the U.S. As I mentioned later on, he would, actually when he was only a boy, he was only 12 or 13, he went to work on the B&O Railroad and spent 50 years working on the railroad. But I'm going to read you from the very end of this, because it does speak to how this concern for the earth, the land, nature, however you want to phrase it, it's also about the connections we have among ourselves, going back to that first Leopold quote. There are two things that interest me: the relation of people to each other and the relation of people to land. And it flows both ways. Think in your own life who it is that connected you. Everybody here has some connection. Even if you don't think of yourself as a conservation person or environmental person, you all have had life-forming experiences in places. And sometimes they have to do with seeing a bird or whatever, or catching a fish. But they often have to do with the person you're with and the place you are with them, whether it's my mom playing Scrabble at Pymatooning or my dad taking me. There used to be a sportsman club here on the edge of town, first place I ever fished. So this is the end of, at the end of his interviews, I wrapped it up with this. Grandpa told many more stories during our 2 weeks together. Stories about his family finding its way in America, of the trials of a young immigrant boy, of going to work on the B&O at the age of 14, of his personal struggle to overcome the debilitating stutter in his speech, of his finally successful courtship of Helen Damazi, of prejudice and promotions at work, of family struggles during the Great Depression, of children and music and train wrecks and old friends. Of the many moments I shall remember from our time in the garage together, two will always stand out for me. The first came during our first morning, when Grandpa was telling of his early childhood hikes into the hills above Cesa, a little town in the hills of Italy, southern Italy. When after his chores were done, he would walk up to the hillside springs and wildflowers, past the foxes and the vipers, up to where he could see everything around. Quote, "From there I could see miles and miles, all that valley below me, all the peaks above me, all around me." He spoke of it all, of the clear and beautiful mountain air, so happily. Black elk of the Ogallala Sioux, on the other side of the earth, and not so many years before, had stood on his sacred mountain above the Dakota Plains and envisioned the whole hoop of the world and all the living things within it. Grandpa's view, while maybe not so mystical, was filled with a similar sense of awe and gratitude, and I believe he shared more than a little of that expansiveness that comes with deep appreciation. Black Elk Speaks. Now I'm remembering. That was one of the books I said was a model for me because it's an oral history. And I said to my professor, "Hey, I want to do what Nehart did with Black Elk with my granddad." Black Elk Speaks may have been more fitting preparation for my time with Grandpa after all. The second moment came at the very end of our 2 weeks of conversation. Grandpa had a healthy sense of the dramatic. As we were trying to wrap it all up, he found just the right words. Grandma was trying to get us in for dinner. We sipped the last of our wine. There was a lot of wine being drunk those 2 weeks. And Grandpa spoke of railroading. He had a bank job downtown. After he retired, he was the janitor at one of the banks right down on downtown Newcastle. The bank job had kept him active and provided a little extra income, enough maybe to invest in all those saving bonds that he and Grandma gave the kids and grandkids at Christmas. But his heart had never really left the railroad. For so long, his job was to fix railroad cars and disentangle train wrecks. It was rewarding and difficult work, and it all stayed with him. Quote, "I'm railroading every night," he said. And these are his words. "I dream railroads every night, no matter what. Too many years. Figure, 14 years old when I went there to 65 years. That's a lot of heartaches. Rough days, rain or shine, rough, believe me. Grandma, all the kids, they remember me when I'd walk in cold, hungry, lots of times wet and everything. That's the way it was. always ready at all hours of the night. Get called right away for Newton Falls, Akron, Points West, Points East, Buffalo Division, Pittsburgh Division, Youngstown. But I'm still railroading. And I know I'm going to railroad tonight, a little more than ever. Yeah. In America, there was no gold in the streets. No, there was steel in the rails. For me, those two moments have always seemed like the bookends of our storytelling time. And in a way of Grandpa's life. On one end, a boy's idol in the Mediterranean hills, a memory softened and warmed, I'm sure, by nostalgia, but treasured so very deeply. And on the other end, the reality of challenging and often dangerous work amid the colder hills and valleys of industrialized western Pennsylvania, equally treasured. May all of us make our journeys from childhood to twilight, from innocence to obligation, from anticipation to reality, with such steadfast spirit as Grandpa's, and with a smile, and maybe a snort of good whiskey. So, that is not what I planned. You got what you got. I'll show you pictures next time I come to town, but I'm happy if you want to stick around. I know it's late, and I don't even know if lights are still out or not, but I'm happy to chat and answer any questions or tell me of any stories if you knew my family. How many are old Newcastlers here? Really old Newcastlers? All right, question. Ken Eve's Pizza. Yeah. That's what my dad was Ken, my mom was Eve. Ken Eve's Pizza. That's how my dad worked his way through college. They opened a pizza shop. And people who are old remember how good that pizza was. All right. Anyone? Yeah.
Could you discuss green fire? That was how I was first introduced.
Sure. Oh boy, yeah. So I've been working for forever almost with what's called the Aldo Leopold Foundation in Wisconsin. It's a nonprofit group that carries on. It was formed by the 5 children of Aldo and Estella Leopold. They were a remarkable family. These five children all became important scientists in their very different fields. 3 of them are in the National Academy of Sciences. No other family has 2 siblings, much less 3. They all lived, except for one, into their 90s. Really, just Estella, the youngest, just passed away 2 years ago at 97. So they formed this foundation to carry on their family's work. One project back now almost 20 years ago now was to do the first full-length documentary film on Leopold, and I'm in it. That was not the original plan, but I ended up being the narrator of the film and being on screen. I was drafted basically. And if you ever want to screen it here, we can make that happen. The director and editor of the film, they now live in Connecticut. Maybe they'd come over. It'd be fun to meet them again. We all become very good friends. We were like a little rock and roll band on the road for 4 years filming and just having so much fun. And what made it most fun was reaching out to people I already had been working with to help them tell their stories about what they found in Leopold's work that was inspiring to them. So whether it's a rather crusty old rancher friend of mine out in New Mexico, or oh gosh, my friend on the south side of Chicago who has an urban garden and education center who's a hero to me. People from the most diverse walks of life you can imagine who found a common thread in Leopold's work and their own work in caring for the ethic in their own ways and places. So the film is 15 years old now. It's a little dated, not too bad. When I occasionally watch it again now, I'm like, I said that a little differently, I wish. But it is available for screening or streaming. If you are interested, I can let you know how to do that. Yeah?
So I didn't quite catch it if it was mentioned, but speaking of connections, what pulled you to write the biography for Aldo?
Okay. How did I get interested in Leopold? What pulled me? When I finished college, I was interested in environmental stuff. This was the late 70s, and there was a lot of things we needed to start dealing with. And my own love of the outdoors, really, was what's motivating deeply. But it was like in the academic world, these new fields were popping up. Environmental history was a brand new field. Environmental conservation biology, which is how I spent most of my career, studying biodiversity and conservation, was just coming together. The field of environmental philosophy and ethics was brand new. And Leopold was a central figure from that essay. That was a foundation stone for an entire academic field. But a funny thing about philosophers is they're not historians. They're interested in the ideas that are eternal, that float around in space and give truth to the world. And it's like, don't you want to know when he wrote that essay and why? Nah, not really. Which mystified me. I said, well, okay. And then I was very interested in studying environmental philosophy. Then I started reading environmental philosophy, and it's very dense and not poetic. And I said, I think I'm not going to be an environmental philosopher, but I can do their homework for them. So I actually figured out why and when Leopold wrote that foundational essay. And the more you got into it, the more you saw in Leopold a real figure who could ground a lot of things that were happening at that time. This is the 1980s now. Ronald Reagan is president. The backlash against the environmental movement is strong, as it is right now. And yet there was connections being made too, between environmental ideas and justice ideas and scientific emerging ideas. Climate change was beginning to show up on the horizon. We've known that science since the 1800s. It's not new at all, but it was becoming more and more of a public issue. And I saw in Leopold's story something that could give common ground, or I hoped would give common ground, to understand how we got from where we were 100 years ago to where we are now. And his story is unique. There's no other figure in our history that the arc of his story helps us to understand the larger things happening in this arena of environmental work. So I was attracted to that. Through his story, you could tell a much larger story. And no one had done it. That's the other thing. There was another scholar who was a colleague. She wasn't able to got busy with her academic career and wasn't able to pull it off. So here I was 24 years old, and it fell into my lap, and I said, well, I don't know how to write anything. Let's go. Let's do it. Let's see what we can do. And my joke for the old people in the room is, isn't it amazing what you can do in your 20s? I could never do that now. But at the time, it was such a compelling thing and really did drive me. And by the way, you have a copy, right? Yeah. Oh, you just reminded me. So here's the book as it was originally published. I just want to point out.
That's the book you wrote?
This is my PhD. If you open it to the dedication, look, to my grandparents, Joe and Helen DeVivo of Newcastle, Pennsylvania. Just one. I have a picture of my granddad who had a third grade education trying to read this book. I said, you don't have to, Grandpa, I'll just tell you the stories. So that was really what was motivating me and I think it's even more true now. And if I were giving another lecture, I often do give these days, it's about, and this is for the students in the room, think, again, you old timers, think of what it is to be 20 years old right now. Think of the world and the experience that the people on this side of the room have had, especially in the last 4 or 5 years with COVID, political turmoil, environmental and climate change, et cetera, crises, one crisis after another, all of them connected. And so it's a time when it's really important for us to come together and try to understand the historical foundations of how we got into this crazy moment we're living in. And yes, it is utterly goddamn crazy what we are living in right now. And it's important to say that aloud. This is not normal. And we have to find our way forward, and that's where history and stories are most valuable and important. So even back then, though, and I'm not alone in this, there's plenty of others any of us who get intrigued by something like this. But it felt so compelling right then to use this story of this person, this individual, to again tell the larger story to help ground us, or my favorite word of the day, to orient us, because we live in disorienting times. Yeah.
Not sure how to pose this quite, but I'm not that familiar with Mr. Leopold, although I will be after this. But did he speak much about how Western society specifically poses man against nature? Because we are nature, right? I mean, that realization doesn't always hit people very strongly, but we are it. And you mentioned the man to connection between humans and the earth, and does he speak to how we are that?
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah, he does.
and other sentient beings.
In a number of places, both in his famous book and as well as in other writings. He doesn't dwell on it. That's not his strength. But he read enough history, philosophy, etc. to understand that. And so you'll find a few key passages where he basically says the dominant value system of Western culture has created this dualism, this binary, this division between humans and the natural world. And I say dominant because there's always a non-dominant tradition in any culture too. There's always an alternative tradition that is not that way, and we certainly have those in Western society as well.
I'm sorry,
Yeah.
the Thich Nhat Hanh and
Yeah.
his concept of inner being
Yep,
and the connectedness of all things.
exactly. And yet, this is where the interesting paradox comes in. In Buddhist cultures, and I've worked in Eastern Asia a bit, there's also a different kind of disconnect. And my favorite story, not favorite, the most revealing story on this, we were talking about cranes on the way in here, right? So I also work with a group called the International Crane Foundation that works with the world's largest, tallest flying birds all over the world. So the story, as it goes, the founder of the group, who's a dear friend of mine, went to Japan to study the beautiful, incredibly beautiful Japanese crane. It's one you see on Oriental artwork a lot. Went to Japan, where this population is. Japanese ornithologists didn't know how many there were, because it was such a symbol. It was like it was not even a living thing anymore. It was a symbolic thing. George went out, surveyed, said, well, there's about 500 cranes, including the non-migratory population up in Hokkaido in northern Japan. Overnight, he's a hero in Japan. And what I'm getting at here is, in any large global religion or belief system, it's dominated by certain trends. They had ceased to think of this creature as a living thing that science could study and understand. And it becomes symbolic, it was almost extinct. So no culture has the monopoly on wisdom. We're at a time when, the way I put it these days is, we need all wisdom on deck right now. Whatever tradition we can draw on, that we can plug together.
Real quick,
Yeah.
Thoreau did a nice job of intertwining that. I wasn't
Absolutely,
trying to
yeah.
relevate Eastern per se, but like Thoreau.
Absolutely. Thoreau drawing, especially on Hindu literature, brought to early America, early colonial America, settler America, an Eastern perspective that hadn't been there before. So we're in that time too where we can share all these sources of wisdom. And now I mentioned Robin Kimmer, and I'll mention her again because she's a dear friend. Bringing forward traditional ecological knowledge, as it's called, TEK, indigenous perspectives, that is resonating deeply right now. And there's reasons that we could go into why, but her book went from being obscure to sitting on the New York Times bestseller list for weeks and weeks and weeks. So you can see where there's a hunger out there for trying to find all the sources of wisdom that we need to get through this moment we're in. That's how I think of it. Yeah.
So I was fortunate enough to go on the trip that Dr. Dewar talked about, and one of the big points that we had was writing down our Leopold moments that we called them,
Yeah.
which were kind of like moments that your grandfather had in Italy. So, like, what was your personal Leopold moment that kind of like sparked you into this?
Oh, Lord. I've learned in Q&As just to say the first thing that pops into my head, whether it makes sense or not. So when you were asking the question, the very first thing that popped into my head was fishing up in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan once. And I caught a brook trout, beautiful brook trout, in this little stream behind the cabin we had back then. And I was so excited. I must have been 10 or 12 years old. I was so excited to catch this because it had been one of those things where, look at that bit of water there. That should have a trout in it. It looks like a spot that should have a beautiful brook trout in. I cast it. I landed this brook trout and was like, oh my God, it worked. And I was running to take it to my brother to show off that I caught this beautiful fish. And on the way, I noticed the fish was losing all of its eggs. It was a gravid female, and it was losing all of its eggs because I was being such an asshole. That was a lesson. I never did that again, and to this day I reflect on that. It's Leopold's moment when he sees the green fire dying in the eye of the wolf that he'd shot. You know, a very famous essay. If you haven't read Leopold, that's the one you want to start with. It's called Thinking Like a Mountain. Very powerful essay, and it's all about, the theme is all about, don't try to control stuff, because when you try to control stuff, it backfires, and you end up getting hurt, and the world you live in gets hurt too when you try to control things. So that was a moment like that, and there's been many others that are more positive than that, but we all have those, and it's not one moment. There's an accumulation as we see beyond the surface of the experiences we have. And it doesn't have to be in a wild place. That's the other thing to really make note of. It doesn't have to be in a remote wilderness area. It can be anywhere. I remember asking this question of a student once. I said, describe to me your favorite place in the world. That was the assignment for the week for my students. One of them said, oh, it's the wrestling room at the UW-Madison. That's where he felt his cosmic connection. Another one said, waking up on the balcony in Singapore, 60 stories above downtown as the sun was rising over Singapore. I'm like, there you go. Doesn't matter. Any place can be the place that connects you if you're open to the experience. Leopold gives you examples of that. That's what made his book durable. When you read this book, and you can attest to this, Leopold's land is not scenic Rocky Mountain stuff. This is a worn out, wasted piece of Wisconsin farmland in the 1930s. It's sand and weeds. It's nothing. But the ecologist's eye allows you to see into that land, to see, as he put it, the drama of the land, no matter where it is. So it's a really important thing about Leopold. He's not like other famous writers like John Muir in Yosemite in California, or Edward Abbey in the beautiful Southwest Canyonlands. Leopold's writing about degraded land. And that's another of the important things that he offers is any landscape can contain wonder if you have the eyes to see it. Yeah?
Being an environmental science major and trying to go out into that kind of field, how do you suggest to kind of navigate, as you were talking about, the current kind of turmoil around environmental ethics and issues, specifically because I'm currently writing a paper on ocean temperature rise in relation to climate change, and it's really depressing. So just like kind of what kind of things do you suggest?
Well, yeah, one of the lines Leopold that is most quoted these days is, to be an ecologist is to live alone in a world of wounds. That line started catching on more and more, I've noticed over the years. To live alone in a world of wounds, because you see the damage. You understand it. You've been trained to see it. It's your job sometimes to see it. How do you live with that emotional burden? Well, the first thing is to say it's not you or I live alone in the world. Nothing is done in isolation, and that this time calls for us all to be supporting one another and to finding those, whether it's your friends or in organizations or kindred spirits, wherever you may find them, so that it is not your burden to bear alone. The second thing is action. Action is the antidote to despair. Action is the antidote to despair. Get out and do something. And that can be something on the land, it can be something with friends, it can be something, if you're concerned about the political realities, go out there and volunteer. Do something. Because that takes your attention away from the moment of anxiety. Have a creative, I'm making this stuff up. Have a creative outlet. I mentioned music, I can't imagine life without music, and our family is just there every single day. And I can't imagine it. It's how you channel stuff. So whatever your creative outlet is. And not only that, if you're studying science, it ties in. Finding those connections between the creative expression and the logical brain at work, doing your science. That's what Leopold was all about. Here he is, one of the leading ecologists in the world, but it became a priority in his last several years to write this book of essays. And he encouraged his own students in that way too, which is kind of, you don't hear many professors back then, certainly, and not even now, who will say, try to connect your knowledge to your heart. It's one reason Robin Kimmerer's book is really captured too, because she talks about this a lot, that in indigenous knowledge systems, there's no separation of your brain from your emotions. So those are some ideas, but and keep, the thing with scientists, and we're all of us, whether we call ourselves scientists or not, if we're curious humans, we get drawn to the things that for some reason enrapture us, whether it's birds, plants, whatever it is that turns your crank, whatever. Find the thing that you most enjoy, and that's the stuff that gets you through the difficulties. Climate is a tough one, because it's not like you grab your binoculars, go out and see birds, and at least I saw some sapsuckers today. Climate is like, you can't quite, it's too big. It's too remote and too abstract, and yet it's with us every single day, so it's particularly a challenge. But there's a lot of writing on this right now, particularly for this generation. Whole fields have grown up to say we need to be dealing with the anxiety that climate change induces. It's a public health issue, among other things. So there are entire fields and studies that are actually devoted to this. I could go on and on, but
Jane Goodall wrote quite a bit of this in recent decades on hope. And she makes the same point that hope is active. So it requires engagement, and it requires action.
Hope is a verb with its sleeves rolled up. That's David Orr. That's David Orr.
He's a Westminster grad.
No. Really?
Isn't he?
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
How about one more? And I can hang out more, but I know people are eager to.
Have you ever done any research into the conservation effort in the Florida Everglades?
The Everglades. Not too much, but I can make a direct connection with you. Oh boy. Here's one for you. Yeah, so alligator Alcatraz. Everybody knows what that is? And not know that reference? And sadly, we all know what alligator Alcatraz is. So when the Trump administration announced that they were going to detain immigrants and other people they don't like in the Everglades, where did they do it? They went to an airstrip. Right? Maybe you saw the photos. It's an old airport that was being planned outside of Miami. That airport was originally proposed in the 1960s. And the Everglades had, of course, been a battleground for conservation work for decades by then. Most famously associated with Marjorie Stoneman Douglas, who led the effort. She was an amazing woman, a journalist, who became the major defender of the Everglades for decades. She lived until she was 105 or something. So the Everglades was always, being chopped at the edges, or plans to drain it, and big chunks were drained, of course, to support the sugar industry up by Lake Okeechobee. But the airport, so this is proposed in the early 60s. The scientist in the US government, in the US Geological Survey, decides he's going to do an analysis of this because he'd been asked to do this. He had formerly served as the chief water scientist in the US Geological Survey. Maybe that's what he still was. His name was Aldo Leopold. It was Luna who got St. County Almanac into print. The same Aldo Leopold. He prepares a statement of what the environmental impacts of this proposed airport would be on the Everglades. This is, I forget the date, 63, 64, 65 in there. That becomes the template for creating environmental impact statements under the soon-to-be National Environmental Policy Act, passed later in the 60s. So there's a direct connection between the threats to the Everglades and this Leopold family. They seem to show up everywhere when there's something important that happens. So Luna's work on that has been well studied. Really interesting topic. I got to meet him when he was in his 80s and 90s. Very incredibly intelligent man. He was like the world's leading water scientist. He was incredible. And all you had to do was ask him a question like that, which I did. And he would tell you in great detail, the hydrology of the Everglades and why this disastrous plan was being proposed.
I grew up spending most of my time in the Everglades, so recently it's been you can tell it's from when I grew up to now, you can see the difference of how everything's been pushed back more.
Yeah.
It's all been modernized and built.
Well, this goes back to the question of how to keep your attitude adjusted through all this. You lose some, but you keep working. Just to end on a positive note, Lake Okeechobee was just in the news. You're shaking your head. Maybe you heard this. So
Yeah.
I just paddled Okeechobee for the first time a few years ago.
It's beautiful.
It's amazing. It's well worth it. Another bucket list thing to do. And there was a mine being proposed right adjacent to Lake Okeechobee, one of the best preserved and unique wetlands of the entire eastern U.S. And geologically, I don't want to go into it anymore, but you have to imagine a basin and a rim around that basin formed during the ice ages, and the mine was being proposed to be digging into the rim, which would have drained the entire Lake Okeechobee. So, I'm sorry, I went Okefenokee. I'm talking about Okeechobee, and it's the Okefenokee swamp in Georgia. That's what I'm meant to be talking about. I'm losing it here. So it was the Okefenokee that was just protected in the last few months. And so there's a good story. You do lose, but there's a lot of people out there working so hard. And that's the last thing I'd say if you're a young person here is we're desperate for young people to join these organizations and to help get involved and go out on work days and all that sort of thing. It's constantly, anytime I speak to any students, I say, come volunteer next Saturday or whatever, find a place to do it. You've got probably plenty of examples around here, places you can put your shoulder to the work, sweat a little. There you go. And that will help take away your sense of anxiety for at least a few days. And you'll make friends doing it. So. There you go. Okay, I'm talked out. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Meine, for braving the weather, and despite the fact that we had no power and all of that. So thank you for making the trip from Wisconsin to be here with us tonight. And thank you to all of you for joining us again, despite no power. Whether this is your first cultural series event that you've been to, or whether you've been to every single one that we've done, the Newcastle Library is really grateful that you're here and really excited that you continue to support us with this. With that in mind, I was talking to some board members today, giving them a presentation about, what do I do and what does adult services do? And one of the main points that I made when I was talking about all the programs that we run, especially the cultural series, is that we cannot do what we do without our community partners, without our sponsors. If you look at this banner here, we have so many different organizations and individuals in our community who come together to support us, to provide whether it's monetary or in-kind support, and we can't do anything that we do without them. So I just want to take the time to thank them, especially our friends here at Westminster College. Andrew and myself are both alum, so we have a really strong connection to the college, and we love to be back here. Especially Dr. Lar and the history department provided the wonderful refreshments that are completely gone, by the way, so it was a good job. And then, of course, the Center for the Environment, Dr. Clarence, Dr. Boylan, Dr. Dewar. We are so grateful for everything that has been done to support us at the apiary and here giving us the space tonight, and a lot of your students to help us. So thank you. Now, as we mentioned, this is the last event for our Interconnected World, which is the Fall Cultural Series. It is already time to start thinking about the Spring Cultural Series. So, Spring 2026, please mark your calendars for We the People, which is going to be a celebration of America's 250th anniversary, specifically the people in our community that we can connect back to the revolution. We're going to be doing different programs, such as tracing our genealogy with the Daughters of the American Revolution. We'll be touring Greenwood Cemetery, which has several Revolutionary War era veterans and graves, including, I learned today, a drummer boy. And we will also have, topping it all off, a visit from an indigenous group out of Pittsburgh will be coming up here, and we'll be doing a performance and also talking about their culture and the indigenous Americans in this area. So please make sure to mark your calendars for We the People. And now it's time to do what everybody is actually here for. We are going to draw the winner of the lovely bench, and also the power's back on. You can show your pictures if you want now.
All right, I'm going to start my lecture now.
Yeah, start again. But wait, stay up here, because who better than to draw the winner of the Aldo Leopold bench than Aldo Leopold's biographer himself, Dr. Meine. So I'm going to shake this up nice and good, because my mother did buy a ticket, so I have to make sure nobody can accuse me of cheating. Peel this off.
That's her way of saying they can accuse me of cheating.
Exactly. You're going to go home, so it's fine.
All right, here we go.
All right, let's see. It is Jack Reed. Amazing. Now, if you don't have a way to get it home tonight, we have your phone number. We'll give you the library's phone number. We can coordinate it.
All right.
Thank you again, everyone.
All right, then. Wow, that was timing, wasn't it?
I have one. For you. It's important. It's for what I'm studying. It's a silver medal.
Bye. Good to see you.
Of course.
I'll be around in the spring for
Okay.
your event.